We have a very interesting session for which we have a guest speaker from Microsoft. He'll be joined on the stage by our very own Ryan Hawkwater from Baxter, and they will be talking about transforming healthcare and the future of AI. Following that, we have a session, and a very engaging session, which I must say is going to bring all the conversation that we were having about real-time locating back to the full circle to see how it actually really worked at a center. So that's by the Stanford team, and I'm deeply grateful for them for sharing that experience with us. And then we have Ellie from University of Miami talking to us about their journey for magnet status. Cannot wait to hear that session. Following that, we'll have a short break, and if you have not checked out, I encourage you to please run up during that break and check out and come back, and then we'll be hearing from our Baxter leaders. So this is a great agenda for the rest of the morning, and I hope you enjoy the sessions. Thank you very much.
Only thing is on the left ear. Do you mind if I sit on the far side?
Your choice. Do
I'm sorry. I'm living with the tradition of making something in the morning. I actually forgot to invite my esteemed speakers. It's always nice to start on a lighter note, right? So, transforming healthcare, the future of AI and its impact on patient care. I know we all heard a lot about AI yesterday, so here's your chance of hearing it from the experts. Sean Hamill, Senior AI Architect from Microsoft, and our very own Ryan Hawkwater, Senior Director of Digital Strategy and Growth, Baxter. Please.
Go for it. Thank you.
I'm so happy.
Thank you.
All right. Hope everyone's excited. I know in a lot of the sessions yesterday, everyone was talking about AI. So hopefully we can go over some of the stuff that we're seeing and hearing, and also get a lot of questions back from you guys and hear what you hear from the expert. So today I have Sean Hamill join me. Sean, why don't you give us a little background of what you do and how you got to where you're at and what you do for Microsoft?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you so much for inviting myself and Microsoft to be part of this conference. We're really, really excited to be here, mostly because we just see a huge amount of potential in our collaboration with Baxter as it relates to AI and other kind of facilities. And we're a tech company, but ultimately one of the missions and our CEO has outlined in the last couple of years has been like this real emphasis on transforming healthcare using some of our technology. But maybe just as a bit of a way of introduction of myself, so as mentioned, I'm a senior AI architect on our healthcare and life sciences industry team, and just what basically my day-to-day involves using AI with some of our largest customers to try and transform healthcare. So my team specifically works on trying to basically apply AI models, be it through something like patient record summarization or looking at predictive analytics for people's outcomes and things like that in order to hopefully improve healthcare. And just my background kind of comes from or stems from a little bit of a research background in healthcare AI, and it's funny enough, like mostly on the computer science side. So one of the big learnings I took early on in some of my research was if everyone's kind of seen the growth of ChatGPT, GPT, or the T in GPT stands for transformers, and some of the first research I did was around this topic, and just for without getting too much into the specifics, it's all about predicting the next most likely word. And so one of the things that I worked on in the very early days is like, well, if we can predict the next most likely word, could we predict the next most likely billing code? And so I was working with the National Health Service, and what we were looking at is like if you could have something like a billing code that would say frequent urination, trouble sleeping, overweight, could the next most likely be diabetes. And one of the big learning points I took from that was, yes, we could do it, but it took 4 or 5 days to train on a supercomputer and then 3 hours to get one single billing code out. And what's funny is that after all of this work that we put in, there's 65 million people in the UK. If you tried to predict every single billing code, we'd still be here trying to predict the first 10 people in, in the UK. And so, but one of the foundational things that has really kind of educated me and was kind of the sprint was I took this technology to a group of clinicians in the NHS, and I said, look, this is something really exciting. And I showed them a patient, and we said, you see, we can predict diabetes. And the clinician kind of looked at me and said, I looked at the patient record and I said, I could have told you they were going to get diabetes. And so that was, but what would be really helpful is if you could tell us, how can we prevent this patient from having diabetes? And that's some of the partnership stuff that ultimately we'd love to do with and are doing with Baxter.
Awesome. Yeah, so good kind of segue. So we have a mix of IT as well as clinicians in the room here. So what are some key things that they should know, they should be up to speed on, that they should be able to take back to their systems, just to have conversations and know when they're talking and how to pull it in and where the right fit is and what you're seeing?
Yeah, to me, it comes down to a couple of things, and really the big transformational factor in the last couple of years, and that's been the rise of a lot of the technology that you've seen, with ChatGPT, with copilots, and so on and so forth, is this idea of the transformer. And the reason it's a big deal is because previously, and you might have seen a little bit of this, like CAPTCHAs, when you have to put in XYZ in order to get into a website. Those sorts of machine learning models have been around for a long time. But previously what would happen is you would have this model that would be really good if you gave it enough pictures of a cat and a dog at saying, that's a cat or a dog. But suddenly, if you gave it a picture of a duck, it would say really confidently, I've seen that, that's a dog, right? And so they wouldn't generalize. So you couldn't use them for lots of different use cases. And that was a big problem, especially in the healthcare context, because you could do the same with, say, radiology or pathology images. You'd show them millions of pathology or radiology images and say, that's pneumonia in that X-ray. And then what would actually happen would be you'd show it to another picture of a patient that would have a completely different condition, and it would say, I'm very confident that's pneumonia. And so that was no good. It just wouldn't generalize. However, the thing that's really been exciting for us in the last couple of years with the rise of some of this new technology is that you can use these singular models for lots and lots of use cases. So the same model that you can use, or the same architecture that you can use for writing a funny poem with ChatGPT, you can actually use in conjunction with some other data sets to predict disease states. And the reason that's a really big deal is suddenly you can reason over patient records and take that into account. But again, without getting a little bit too specific, and back really to your question, is nothing hugely has changed in terms of how these models are designed, but we have lots more data to work with so that we can make them more accurate, we can make them much more useful. And in addition to that, we have a lot more compute to be able to do that. And one of the exciting things from our perspective around our partnership with Baxter is that, if you go to any Microsoft Technology Center in the US, is you can go and you can look at some of our technology, but we have a lot of our partners, and actually you can go and see a Baxter bed in these centers and basically see how much data is coming off it. And that's really exciting for us, because if you can take the conjunction of some of the information and data that's streaming off of these devices, take some of the information from an EMR and take some of the information from medical imaging, you can make really accurate diagnoses and hopefully help with triaging patients and so on and so forth. It's really exciting for us.
Just a quick show of hands. Has everyone used ChatGPT other than making a haiku to send an email to somebody? Keep the hands up here real quick. So if you've used it, how many people have actually saved time by using ChatGPT, or did they found that it spent more time correcting it to read the answers and correct them? kind of a mix here. I mean, so you know, I think one of the things that's, you know, interesting when we look at ChatGPT and some of these different models, and they're in the early phases. I mean, it's still learning, and we're still developing it. There are a couple examples. You know, there's an example of a mental health company that put a chatbot together that when somebody called in, they were chatting with it, and they were saying that they were lonely and that they, you know, were depressed, and the response was make more friends. You know, I think we're in a little bit of the infancy in some of this stuff. We had another one where someone was nauseous and had a headache, and they said either were pregnant or had rabies. So somewhere in between is kind of where we're going to go. And so talking with Sean and some of the work that we were doing, you know, he's got a very good way to kind of explain these kind of like how these systems are evolving and stuff like that. So Sean, you wanna kind of run through those?
Yeah, and it's funny. I saw the hands up. Like I do a lot of visits and with some of the research partnerships that I work on. And I won't mention the hospital system, but I went into, and it was like 6 in the morning or something, and there's these like rows of residents and junior nurses that are kind of like standing in the hallway, and they're all on their phone. And I started talking to one of them. I was like, they were saying they were preparing for their rounds. And I was like, oh, so what are you working on now? And turns out they were all on ChatGPT, and they were putting basically information about the patients they knew they were going to see in the rounds, and asking like, what are smart questions to ask my... So it's funny. So if you get some very clever questions, just know that they're not always... It's true, and one of the things that I think about a lot when it comes to this technology is we're in this stage that, and I'll talk a little bit about another kind of topic in a second. But like one of the really interesting things about these models is that they're like very, very good fact checkers or truth checkers, but they're in their current stage they're not necessarily great truth generators. And I'll explain what I mean by that. If anyone has experience with some of these models, you'll know that sometimes you ask a question, you're like, oh, I don't really know how it got to this point. But if you ask, that's not right, or you state that's not right, it actually comes back and you're totally right, here's the right answer. And the reason for that is, and I won't put anyone on the spot, is like if I started saying, here's a patient, here's their information, tell me right now on the spot, like what do you think the diagnosis is, or how would you treat them? Like you might have quite a good answer, but you might have gaps in that answer. And the same is true of these models. They have such an infinite scope of information that if you ask them these really broad questions, there's going to be a gap in their answers. And on the flip side, if you ask them like, why don't you check my answer? It has reduced the size of the scope of the possible information set that you can answer from. And so that's really fascinating to us, because suddenly like what you'll see with some of the new models that were coming out, without spoiling things, is that we actually have some of this truth checking built in. And so they're starting to get much more accurate. And if you've seen one of our announcements recently about our O1 model, we've gone from proficiency on a PhD level test of about 40% in biology and high school biology. We've gotten to 80% on PhD level examinations in biology and chemistry. And that's really exciting for us, because if you can get to that like truth checking stage, then it can be a really, really good partner and what we kind of could perceive as co-pilots for clinicians. And that's why it's really, really exciting for us, and especially on some of that accuracy point, and hopefully fewer of those mistakes. And then just a last thing on that is, the other analogy I give about the evolution of some of these models has been like they were originally like very unhelpful assistants. Then they kind of morphed into these like let's say less competent assistants, or incompetent assistants, and now they're starting to get to this point where they're very, very competent assistants. And like the analogy I give in my own role is that it's 3 years ago, I think now, is that we released this model that was very good at coding, and suddenly like at the time 0% of the code submitted into this repository of code called GitHub was machine generated. And then today my role, for instance, is completely transformed. 51% of the code that's submitted is machine generated. And that's really exciting because it means I have more time to spend doing some of the parts of the job that are frankly more interesting, about thinking about ways that we can improve healthcare. And I think the same is going to be true in this evolution for a lot of clinicians, is that currently it's maybe a little bit of an unhelpful or incompetent assistant, but suddenly when you this evolution and how quickly this technology is moving forward means that you're going to have this co-pilot that's going to do a really fantastic job. And one of the things that we were talking about just before sitting down was some of the work at Mass General Brigham, where they basically reduced the time that it reduced hugely the time. And do you have the stat?
It was 40%. I think they said 40% is what they shared of clinical documentation.
Yeah, so 40% of your time is reducing clinical documentation, which, if you look at some of the parts that clinicians hate the most about their role or dislike, it's all about documentation. And so that's the sort of the stuff that we want to ease the burden on as well.
Yeah, it was a really neat fact when they not shared it with us. And what they said is that they're actually, staff are happier and they're spending more time getting back to their normal life, right? So they're enjoying their job more, they're not stressed out, and they're just not spending the time after work. One of the other things I think is really kind of coming up, and a lot of these people are going to go back to their health systems. What should they do to prepare? I mean, there's legal, there's cybersecurity, there's a bunch of things that come up. I mean, that's definitely some barriers to entry, especially with data privacy and that. What do you see customers doing or other entities doing to help solve those problems?
Yeah, I've been told this is one of the least helpful analogies, so bear with me. but I equate it a little bit to this wormhole. Oftentimes we go to customers, and this happens a little bit less nowadays, that people are starting to get a little bit more comfortable with some of the technology. But I remember in I say the early days, probably a year and a half ago now, we would come to customers or hospital systems, even med device companies, pharmaceutical companies, and their initial reaction was like we don't know where to start. We've got legal compliance telling us that this might not be the technology that you want to adopt. We're a little bit nervous about it. And what's really funny is that I kind of equate it to a wormhole, where the people were on one side and they were kind of saying this, and then once we said, why don't we start somewhere, and why don't you leverage this technology a little bit and then see where we head with it, is that 2 weeks later I was getting emails being like, hey, I read this paper that came out yesterday, have you read it yet? Can you tell me a little bit about it? And I go, haven't had time since last night to read some of this paper. So this wormhole of going basically from very novice to being absolutely very, very well skilled in the technology. And that's one of the really exciting parts of this technology, is that because it's generalizes, I often talk about this, is that it's a great period of time to be curious and be a generalist, because now you can find out a lot about other disciplines and understand different disciplines using some of this technology. Obviously I'm not anywhere near being a clinician, but what's really helpful for me is sometimes putting things like papers in biology and chemistry and medicine into ChatGPT and be explain this to me, but I'm a computer scientist, and it goes well, think about the brain as a chip or whatever, and then so these analogies. So one of the things that I say about preparedness is inside organizations is there's nothing like it just getting started. And a lot of the other pieces fall into place. And it's the same with compliance and legal. Our experience with them is that, initial hesitance, and then a sudden I realize how there's this moment that clicks with everyone, where they go, oh, this is helpful for me, and therefore I completely understand how this technology can be helpful for somebody else. And the same thing happens with legal and compliance as well.
Yeah. Nice. One of the other challenges I think I see quite often is that, well, first of all, does anyone know what the first medical device is and when it was invented? Someone corrected me in a presentation before. It was 4000 BC. It was a cranial drill. And so now as you kind of look at this evolution, I think some of those are still in some of our customers' accounts. I was with a customer and they said about 75 to 80% of their devices are becoming end of life. And so those devices, it's really hard to optimize and flip a whole fleet. But some of those older devices are really, they don't have the rich data coming in. Is there a way that we can use AI, or how does that, how does not bad data, but how does this old data coming in, going from 4000 BC to the first AI in 2017 with Big Mind, how do those devices, how do we make them smarter with AI? I mean, what are you seeing folks do that, they don't have the money just to flip a whole entire fleet?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it comes down to the information that's in front of you. You'd hope that you wouldn't have to come to a situation where they give you your 4000 BC cranial drill and the patient and go, we're not going to tell you anything about the patient, but here's the drill and figure it out. And I think the same thing is true now with some of this digital age. You'll see in hospitals, and I'm sure in a lot of your organizations, that there's pockets of these machine learning and AI devices, but they're in isolation. And I think one of the great things, or they operate in isolation, I should say. And one of the exciting things about AI is they could start to bring a lot of the information and a lot of the expertise of the different devices and connect them together. The challenge, I guess, is, or the opportunity is that a lot of these devices either don't send out some of these signals that, or they frankly don't add quality signals or add more noise to the information set that the models can work with. And so I think the real opportunity that I think to some extent you're alluding to is that you can actually take a lot of the information off of these and data sets off of this data, off of these devices, and have them contribute to the clinical process. And that's one of the things that we're really excited about, because honestly, bad data in, bad data out, or bad decisions in, bad decisions out as well on the flip side. And so if we can get a lot of this good data flowing from medical devices, that is really exciting for us, because suddenly if you have streaming data off of infusion pumps, streaming data off of the beds, streaming video off of the all of these different information sets, you have a lot more to be able to understand the full picture and the breadth of the patient and make the right decisions in conjunction with some of these models, or just these nudges that could be really helpful.
Cool. So one of the other things that's really neat is about a year ago, I think Microsoft announced their partnership with Epic and ECW and embedding. This is kind of a two-part question. First of all, how's it going? What's been, has it been received well? And then the second is how is that monitored and measured for accuracy? Mm-hmm. You get a lot of data coming in. It's you can't have AI monitor AI, right? That'd be kind of the fox watching the hen house type thing here. So what are customers putting in place, or what are they doing to make sure the accuracy is measured effectively, and they're getting the right data in and quality data, and also getting the use back out of it?
Yeah, so the announcement, and I work very closely with eClinicalWorks, for instance, and the next statement I will say comes from me as Sean rather than from Microsoft. But my opinion is that as tech we've failed, I think, clinicians in a big way with the state, the prior state with a lot of EMRs, from the perspective that I think we've added just huge amount of burden to people's jobs and taken a lot of joy out of people's jobs rather than made it simpler and more effective. However, I think the really exciting thing is that we have, with some of this technology, have an opportunity to address a lot of that, and that's been really the former the foundational kind of structure that we, from which we created those partnerships with Epic and eClinicalWorks. And so everything from, as we said, kind of clinical documentation automation to summarizing of patient records, to drafting responses to messages, and so on and so forth. These are very, very simple for these machine learning or AI models, I should say, but they just save people a ton of time. And honestly, if you email me with certain keywords, it automatically replies with maybe not my words. Let's put it that way. And so, that's one of the things that's really exciting, I think, from this perspective as well, right? But to your point about accuracy, it's funny that you mentioned the chicken in the hen house. Actually, the fox in the hen house, I would say is. It's actually one of the ways it's actually very effective with these models. These models, again, are very, very good at fact-checking. They're not so good at, they're actually very good, I call them well, actually machines, where if you make a statement, they'll tell you, well, actually, in kind of a confident way, and they're actually very effective at that. And so one of the ways that we do actually train these models, and even train bias out of these models, is that we use the information within them. So one of the ways we do that is like, for instance, we actually say like, hey, here's an answer. How good do you think that answer is? And come up with a better answer. And then we train that back into the model so that it's more effective. But we do have a lot of, especially in healthcare, obviously, a human in the loop sort of situations where we go through hundreds, thousands of iterations where we get the model to produce an answer, and then we basically have a human rate it, give a human ID response to it, and then we feed that back into the model for better accuracy.
Nice, yeah. Now I can just picture all these emails just going back and forth in this like infinite spiral of just, actually saw something, it was on like a Reel or TikTok or something like that, where they had two AI ChatGPTs like sitting there talking to each other, and they were answering each other's questions, just great. So just a lot more email traffic kind of going back and forth. So I know we've gone through it quite a bit here, and I want to open it up for questions here shortly, but what are you excited about? What do you see in the, I think you had a great we talked about this, about like predicting the future of AI, and you kind of had a good reference of a competition previously, and then, so maybe you can just hit on that, and then what do you see going forward? What are you excited about here coming up in the future?
Yeah, there's an AI institute that I was talking to Ryan about, before we came on stage, which in 2021 conducted this competition, and they said we'll give $1 million to the researcher that can come closest to predicting how well these models are going to do in certain exams. And so they laid out I think 4 or 5 exams that were math, comprehension, kind of the SAT exams here, SATs, and style questions. And what they did is they went to the Harvards, the Stanfords, the Carnegie Mellons, some of the best computer science AI research institutes in the US, and they basically asked these researchers that you have a chance at $1 million, you just need to predict roughly where we're going to be with AI across the board on this. And so remember, these are people that are working on this technology, so they should be pretty good at predicting how well we're developing it. And so they went and then they averaged out how well everybody thought they would do in the exams, and they said, okay, in 2021 we're about at 18% of the math exam. And then by 2023, they predicted we would be at about 37%, and then by 2024, about 50%. Actually, in 2023, we got 87%, and this year we actually we got 100%, so we have to come up with a new set of exams because they're not good enough, essentially. And so the technology actually, human beings are just very bad at exponential curves, and these technologies just growing so quickly, and it's funny how quickly as humans we get used to them. I still have my mind blown sometimes when I ask, Copilot or ChatGPT questions, and I'm like, how did we get this far? I remember when it took 3 hours to get one word out, and now suddenly I can get an essay in 30 seconds. And then you get people after 2 weeks of using it being like, I'm not that impressed actually with its answer to the philosophical question. I go, we're getting there, and one of the really exciting things for me is it turns out these models keep scaling and keep getting better, and I think they can get more modalities. And one of the cool parts is we started with text. I don't know if people have used this, but you can use images as input now, voice as input. And if anybody wants to see it, I have a cool demo on my phone where you can talk live to these models, and it's kind of scary. They can sing to you, and it feels very human. But one of the things that I'm excited about is the way these models work means they can scale to other modalities beyond video, beyond images. And if we can go generic with that, why not add other types of modalities like genomics, pathology, radiology, and have them in a single model? Because that would be great for even things like clinical trials, being able to say, hey, I have this patient in front of me, could we try and match them into a clinical trial that could be really effective for their oncology treatments or whatever? And that's the sort of thing that I'm really excited about, and to be honest is in the not too distant future.
That's awesome. So really exciting. So I think those are some really cool things coming up in the future. Anything else that people should before we open up to questions, should be excited about for, what they should take back for preparing their health systems or getting it started? Where should they start? How do they start getting going when they go back? And, they call you? Do they get your model that sings to them?
Well, I think, like, again, back to my previous point, and this is where, like, the partnership between Baxter and Microsoft is really exciting, is that, we talk to a lot of clinical organizations, but again, talking to Sean, I think one of the things that we don't do so well is understand clinicians and their workflows, but it's something that Baxter, I think, does very, very well. And so, like, I've been in situations where, I've sat with Baxter colleagues with an organization like Mass General and just been like, what is it, the problems that we want to solve? We have some of that technology foundation that then Baxter builds on, that then is ultimately impacts healthcare in a really positive way. We're a technology company that wants to make an impact in healthcare, but we just don't understand healthcare in the same way that Baxter does.
Awesome. No, I think it's a true partnership, and I think that's like one of those things. I mean, we've worked with Microsoft, we work with all our partners, and they're great at finding a problem, but they have no idea how to solve the problem or show that the problem was solved. I mean, I think there's like a gazillion people out there that I think every health system I've met with wants to try to solve sepsis and still know it's a problem, still don't have to solve the answer for it. So really good. So what I think we can do here is, I want to make sure that we open it up. So we did drop a hint in the beginning. So if you didn't have ChatGPT on your phone and didn't ask ChatGPT for questions, there's no excuse for no questions in here today. Hopefully you did. If not, maybe you have some other questions you want to ask. We do have an expert up here, so I do want to open it up for some questions and answers. They're coming around. They're coming around. You can't see from up here. Heather, I see what you were talking about yesterday. I need to.
I have a question as to how soon do you feel a small community hospital would be able to leverage voice to documentation for the average bedside nurse?
Mm-hmm. This is a great question. So Microsoft, I think it's 2 years ago now, bought Nuance. I don't know if anybody uses Nuance DAX, for instance, or DAX Copilot now. One of the things that why we bought the technology is for scale. So we knew that honestly, it's out of maybe the price range or the economics just don't work out for smaller community hospitals. But we want to bring that technology to much broader field. And honestly, one of the big things that we're doing is even trying to support new languages, for instance, because the community hospitals have different requirements for that sort of thing. So how soon? I'm hoping very, very soon. One of the things that we're seeing with it is that it's scaling. I have roadmap information, but I probably can't say publicly yet, but maybe if you catch me on the side, I'll tell you.
There are a couple other questions out there.
From Ascension Health. I have a question about the predictive analytics, and you alluded to it with diabetes. It's a problem with patient safety, I think, where we try to predict for a patient falling that we're constantly intervening for, or a pressure injury that we're also constantly intervening for. And I think just getting a number and saying someone's high risk doesn't tell me why or how to intervene as a nurse. So what are we doing with technology right now and AI to be able to say, not a black box, you're at high risk, but you have these risk factors, your patient got these medications and this, so therefore apply appropriate interventions?
Yeah, great question. I think actually, I'll let you actually chime in with that because Baxter is doing some really interesting things with it. I'll say one of the research topics that I'm working on at the minute is, it's kind of tangential to what you're talking about. So we saw in traditional machine learning, as you say, is it tells you like the propensity for like a high risk patient or for a medium or low risk, but it doesn't tell you why. It's basically just a mathematical, as you exactly said, is just to say like, I know 80% is going to happen, but I can't tell you why I think it's going to happen. And one of the cool things is, it turns out when you combine these like traditional models with these new like large language models, and give it the data set, it's really good. The new models are less good at telling you a percentage chance of something happening, but they're a really good chance of giving you a narrative around why it's going to happen. So when you combine the two, we've seen this with like financial fraud. So when you give it yes, this credit card was used fraudulently. You get you've had your credit card frozen, and then you call them and you go, why did this happen? And go, we're not really sure. So one of the things that's happening in that technology space is that we actually take the data set plus the machine learning model that originally flagged it, and then combine it with the large language model to write a report to say, hey, these are the reasons why I think this is going to happen. And so we're actually applying the same logic to healthcare. So we're not far off. Hopefully.
Yeah, and I think from a Baxter perspective, our goal is to take that information and then find a good way to get it to the person that needs to consume it, and the right person, right? I mean, we don't need a short essay to tell us why something's going to happen, but here's a nudge, right? How do we nudge staff in the right direction to then go and do an intervention on them? I don't know how much time we have left, but I think one thing that might be also helpful is maybe look a little bit of the difference on AI and machine learning. I mean, sometimes those terms get they're used interchangeably. I mean, you want to touch on that one just real quick, and then how are we doing on time? 15 minutes?
Oh, okay.
Cool. Plenty of time.
So honestly, they are interchangeable. So AI is kind of like a marketing term for machine learning to some extent, but really it's just talk about the same thing. It's like the ability to teach machines how to do something. And AI is just this like term that's developed because we've started to generalize. So machine learning has always been about, like, again, back to my cat-dog analogy, has been about trying to target one single problem state, whilst AI is really us trying to target like all problems with a single kind of approach or model.
Nice. Some other questions out there. I saw there was a couple more hands out there. Sean? No. Yeah, sure.
So I did a session yesterday. I don't know if you were there yesterday, Ryan, with Dr. Patrick Woodard on, humanity in all the technology that, we are seeing these days in healthcare. First of all, how is Baxter and Microsoft both ensuring that humanity remains? How are we ensuring that there's a balance between high tech and high touch? So I know it's a weird question to ask you both, but I just thought I'll put it out there and see what your thoughts were.
I mean, from our perspective, I think it's getting the right notifications to the right person, the right time, making them impactful, and then having the time go back to the patient or go back to the quality of work, right? Making their work a little bit better. I usually travel with some of my clinical counterparts. Kate knows who she is out there. I usually try to connect everything from an IT perspective, so I think there is a balance, right? So how do we moderate, connections, IT, the amount of tech that we're giving staff, the training, like understanding the impact that it has. I mean, again, I would connect everything. I'm more on the IT side of things. And so, there is this fine balance of what we connect and how we do it to actually make them a patient and not like dehumanize them to like a data set, right? So I think that's from our perspective, that's how we do it, is trying to look at it that way. I don't know what are your thoughts on that?
I think, to be honest, very much aligned. To use that, and unfortunately I wasn't at this talk, but I think I wholeheartedly agree, is that I think our vision for it is that we want to do high tech so there can be more of the high touch aspect, taking away some of like the administrative burden and the kind of documentation burden that it's made like healthcare maybe less enjoyable for the clinicians. I think is something that we really want to focus on, and to prevent clinical burnout, but also to be this assistant. And I forget the stat, and I'm going to get hit by my colleague when she hears about this, but I have a colleague, Kathleen McGraw, who's our chief nursing officer at Microsoft, and she gave me the stat about like what percentage of nurses are new, or like in their first 2 years, and it was close to like 40%. I might be making that up, might be hallucinating like the models, well, that was like fascinating to me, and they were talking about like how do you get like all of the experience of 40 years of nursing into the hands of young professional nurses, and she was talking about how these models basically could be huge assets in that perspective, that they could spend more time like with patients and learning learning about these high touch points instead of spending a lot of time in like books essentially. So very exciting.
Hi. How do you balance our reliance on all of this technology with the prevalence of cyber attacks and having the young workforce that you mentioned that they have never charted on paper before? They don't even know how to do that. So then everything you do in your day relies on technology, and when unfortunately, we've had situations where that is no longer available. It kind of cripples a system.
God, these are really good questions. I almost have to pause and think about that. It's a really good question. I think one of the things that and I'm trying to stay away from some of the technology piece of this, but one of the really cool things that we're building is these things called agents. And basically agents are like basically autonomous versions of these models where they can go and crawl software themselves and use software themselves. And one of the things we're doing from like a cybersecurity perspective is that we actually have these agents crawling our systems and trying to attack our systems to say like, hey, is this secure or not? And then writing reports about like, these are the things that you need to secure in order to avoid this. And so I think one of the things to avoid some of these cybersecurity threats, and honestly, it's, again, from a statistics point of view, it's like, it's higher than ever, these attacks, is that we're actually going to use some of this AI to help us protect against them. But it's a great question, and honestly, probably one that could use more than 5 minutes to it, but yeah, thank you.
So I would like to ask, what are some of the virtual AI assistants that you would use on daily healthcare or in healthcare field?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Any AI health assistants that you could use daily in your healthcare, when you work in healthcare?
Yeah, well, like, and I don't want to make this like very Microsoft centric, but one of the cool things that we're doing is, again, nuance DAX from like a clinical documentation point of view, and then the other is we have something called Microsoft Copilot. A Microsoft Copilot is really cool because even from a clinical perspective, what you can do is you can ask like, hey, what are my appointments for today? Could you summarize each patient record in order and give me a summary of each one so that I can prepare for my day? So those are some of the things. And again, like my personal opinion is that like getting very healthcare specific is maybe not the long-term solution. These general models are like quite good at taking on healthcare related tasks, and so like using even things that you would use in your personal life tends to scale pretty well to healthcare. Other than that, I think there's other partners of ours out there that are doing some like very exciting work in the healthcare specific field, but I don't think I have, unfortunately, any specific examples.
This is Mandy with UC Health. I have a question about how is AI doing with video interpretation, such that like they can recognize a pattern of maybe somebody trying to get out of bed before they actually get out of bed, or have to go to the bathroom or whatever.
Yeah, no, I mean, so I'll let me chime in on this one quick. I think the computer vision space is fascinating. I mean, I'm a huge advocate in looking at it, and we've looked at we had people, and we've done some early innovation and looking at it, and we've had hundreds of our staff get out of bed so that we can try to go build the models. We use some synthetic data to build out our models algorithm. I think it's huge. I mean, I think that's going to be the big change, right? When we start looking at not just vision coming in, but we're looking at the ability to predict somebody falling, right? I mean, I think, again, I've got some clinicians that I always work with that have all the fun stats, but I think it's like 19 seconds on average to respond to a fall. How can we give them 30 more seconds, so at least you have 45 seconds to respond to a fall, which is something that maybe it'll let you attack that fall, right? Like get ahead of that curve. So I think that the prediction on, there's tons of stuff. We can look at direction of people moving in hospitals. We can see where they're going in hallways. We can look at flows. We can look at patients. Are they in the bed, out of the bed, and then couple that with some ambient listening on top of it to really see. I know I always do things where sometimes you don't tell the whole story. It doesn't make you didn't say that you went on this trip to some foreign country and came back with something, right? And then having that ambient listening as well as vision, knowing who you're talking to, kind of over the top of it. I think we can also look at different ways with that vision to track assets in the rooms, track staff in the rooms, locate staff in the rooms. I want to be clear. I know we talked about some union stuff yesterday. So locate staff. We've met with other companies that monitor, other partners that have the ability to use computer vision to monitor behavioral patterns, right? So can we, my friends from Salt Lake, they're in here. They were big behavioral health and workplace violence. How do we take those patterns and how do we see somebody escalating and then give some sort of notification, like, hey, this is what you're walking into. Maybe you bring 2 staff into the room or something along those lines. So it's going to get better and better as we start building out these models. And there's a lot more companies kind of coming in the space that we're eager to partner with. From a Microsoft perspective, how are you guys looking at video?
Yeah, to us, it's another modality. Like I think even with Baxter, we're doing some work around this. But yeah, definitely fall detection is a big one. We're actually even doing things like track in the actual medical devices themselves, like tracking basically like polyps during a colonoscopy and things like that, and like identifying them. So yeah, video is a huge space for us.
Exciting.
Hi, this is Maurice. A quick question on a follow-up on the AI. What are you guys doing to prevent it from getting into the dark side? Deal. So what I mean is, like, if AI gets onto the people that actually make the ransomware,
yeah,
now it's going to make the ransomware even better. Everybody in here is afraid of that, and multiple institutions have been frozen until they pay the ransomware. And the government will tell you, don't pay it, but then we're stuck.
Yeah.
What are you doing? Prevent that.
I guess maybe you got my wormhole analogy then earlier. But no, it's a really good question. One of the things that we're like extremely focused on is AI safety. Like some of the models that we have internally, like we spend just literally probably more time actually on doing what's called red teaming, which is basically like making sure that the models can't be abused. So actually, if you ask like these models now that Microsoft develops at a minimum, is like, hey, I want you to go hack this institution, like they just won't do it. They won't obey orders like that. And like that's a lot of the work that we do is literally just making sure that the models are have somewhat an ethic and moral compass as much as you can kind of think about them philosophically as having one. And these are like big parts of it, is that we don't allow them to go after like nefarious uses. And then the other thing is from like a research perspective is that there's not, just to be transparent, there's dangers of models developed by like foreign adversaries that we think a lot about, like, and how they might use them. And then again, back to my original point, is that we're building these agents to actually crawl our systems to make sure that we're actually making the defensive part more accessible to more organizations so that they can like prevent those attacks happening in the first place, even if, as you say, kind of the nefarious actors might want to be using these models to do the same.